we go. Okay, well, hello everybody. Welcome to the Virtual Village Hall today, or the Q&A. We're delighted to be joined by Sunday Times bestselling author Tom Hindle, who's so far published 4 gripping murder mysteries. We've got them all here. So Fatal Crossing, I don't know if you can see there, Murder Game, Murder on Lake Garda, and Death in the Arctic. And then with your 5th, Killer in Paradise, out January next year. Very exciting.
No, thanks for having me. It's lovely to be here, and I loved seeing that little pile of books there. It's always lovely to see. Yeah, thank you for that.
So just a reminder, wait for you to join on. You can send in your questions via the chat, and they'll hopefully pop up, and we'll ask them. Try and get through as many as possible today as we can. But yeah, just quickly jumping into the start of your writing career. What was it about murder mysteries that sort of inspired you for your first novels or a Fatal Crossing?
Yeah, I think looking back at even sort of the kind of the books and TV shows and films that I loved growing up, it wasn't necessarily murder mysteries, but I always really loved mysteries. So anything that had lots of clues and lots of suspects for you to kind of work your way through, and a big reveal at the end. So, and I think one of the great things about the idea of a mystery is it can apply to any genre. Like I read a lot of fantasy when I was a kid, but looking back, I realized that the fantasy books I loved the most were the ones that had, mysteries. I mean, so I was a child of the 90s. The Harry Potter books were enormous. And I firmly believe the first 4 Harry Potter books are just whodunits. But it's not, it's not a murder mystery, but it's, who opened the Chamber of Secrets or something, or who put Harry's name in the Goblet of Fire. And you have all of those, the clues and the suspects and the big reveal at the end, the big, oh, it was you moment. And this is how you did it. And, so I always loved stories like that. Even as like a really little kid, like I remember my favorite cartoon being Scooby-Doo. And again, fine, it might not be quite as challenging a case as something Poirot or Miss Marple might have a go at. But again, every episode of Scooby-Doo is a perfectly formed 20-minute whodunit, I think. So yeah, I've always loved mysteries, and yeah, I guess in any kind of genre. And I guess how I got into crime. Well, let's talk about where A Fatal Crossing came from. So I first had the idea for A Fatal Crossing when I was in 6th form, and I was gonna write it up as a play. So the idea was I had some friends at school, and we were all into kind of like writing and drama and performing and all that sort of stuff. So we had this idea of let's all put on a play, and I thought I'd write it because I had this idea of a missing painting aboard a 1920s cruise ship, and I didn't finish the play in the end. It turned out writing a play was going to take way more work than I thought it would, and so I think I wrote the first half, and we all finished 6th form, went off to uni. But the idea lived in the back of my head for a few years, and when I think it was about 24, I read Anthony Horowitz's Magpie Murders. Which and the first half of that is very it's a book of 2 halves, and the first half of it is very Midsummer Murders. It's very the vicar's been murdered on the day of the vegetable competition kind of thing. And I remember reading that, and it got me back around to my idea of my missing painting on a cruise liner, and I thought, okay, with some adjustments, this could be less of a kind of a caper and more of a crime novel, like a straight up crime novel. And so that's kind of how A Fatal Crossing came about. And yeah, I loved writing it, and I had ideas for a few more, and so I kept going, and here we are.
Here we are, 5 books later. Yeah. So for your latest book, Death in the Arctic, in particular, you have such a great setting and such a great airship. I mean, where did that come from? And I know you mentioned in the author's notes and acknowledgements you have kind of experience working with them, flying in them, and you also visited Svalbard. So it just sounds like a really fascinating development in the story.
Yeah, so the airship actually came first. So I've had quite a few people assume that the idea of doing something in the Arctic came first, and the airship was kind of like the secondary idea. The airship came first. So I spent my 20s working for a PR agency in Oxford, and one of my clients was a company called Goodyear, big American tire manufacturer, and they have an airship in the United States that they fly over. It's like a mascot for the company, and they fly it over like Super Bowls and NASCAR races and stuff. And as a bit of a stunt, they brought it to the UK, and they were going to fly it over some races at Silverstone and fly it over London a little bit as well. And so I was quite heavily involved in the marketing and the press activity around that. And so I had to learn a lot about airships, because, you know, if a journalist rang the office saying, "What's this thing flying over Silverstone, please?" I had to be able to kind of answer whatever questions they had. And I'd written a couple of books at this point, and I was looking for more interesting places to set murder mysteries. And I kind of fell down a bit of a rabbit hole, I guess, of reading about reading about the kind of the golden age of airship travel back in the 20s and the 30s, and all the kind of wild stuff that happened during that time. And I remember thinking this would just be an amazing setting for a murder mystery. The big problem I had was most of those airships kind of flew transatlantic flights, and I'd already done a transatlantic murder mystery set in the 1920s with a fatal crossing, albeit, you know, aboard a ship rather than an airship, but it still just felt too similar. And so it took a couple of years to work out how to approach the airship idea. And I think two things changed. I think the first was I started seeing articles in places like Wired and The Guardian about airships coming back as kind of a potential green alternative to aeroplanes. And so that gave me the idea of, okay, maybe I could do a modern setting rather than a historical piece. And then the other thing that happened was I wrote Murder on Lake Garda, which, you know, set somewhere very hot, very Mediterranean, or very European rather. And I thought I want to do a completely different setting for my next book. So I thought, well, you can't really get much further.
It's colder.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so, Italian castle, baking heat, North Pole. You know, so I thought, okay, I'm going to have a modern airship and I'm going to send it to the North Pole. And I'd say the third thing that happened, actually, and this didn't happen until after I'd pitched the idea to my editor and I started writing, but I learned that the North Pole actually has a history of airship travel. So the very first successful expedition to the North Pole was made in 1926 by airship. So they had attempted it by land and they couldn't do it. They attempted it by sea, couldn't do it. They attempted it in sort of the planes that they had, but the planes of the time couldn't do it. So they went by airship, because airships can stay in the air for days at a time. And so, yeah, the very first trip to the North Pole was made on an airship. And I think once I just had all of this, it just all kind of came together. And then, yeah, as you say, so I did get to fly on the airship, the Goodyear airship. London. So yeah, that was pretty cool. So I was, so it was one of the days that was flying over London, and the way they were operating. So I think I think I'm right in saying there are either 10 or 12. I'm trying to remember. I think it's about 12 passenger seats on board this thing, and what they would do, it was flying out of an airship just out of an airfield just east of London, and the way it would work was the airship would come down and people who were lucky enough to have a seat on that flight would get on, and then it would take off and it would spend an hour. It would fly kind of to Ashard and back, which is about sort of half an hour each way. You get an amazing view of London from the sky, and it would come down and the next people would come on. And I think they were doing about 5 or 6 of those flights a day. And it was people like sort of lots of journalists were going on there. I think we ran a few kind of social media competitions from like Goodyear's Facebook page, and so competition winners were going on there. And and I was on the ground at the airfield looking after journalists, and I think helping out a photographer that we'd hired for the day. And yeah, a seat was going on one of the flights. It turned out someone hadn't shown up for their flight, and my client, who I reported into, I think she was the director of communications for like Goodyear. So she said, if you want it, there's a spare seat going on this next flight. And yeah, I've never signed a waiver so quickly in my life. So I got to fly on one of these things, only for an hour, but even so, it was it was enough. I thought, right, I've got to do this book now. And then I went to Svalbard for a week. To research the book as well. So yeah, I got to do some pretty awesome research for this one.
Definitely. I mean, did you see a polar bear while you were there?
I didn't see a polar bear. That was the one disappointment actually from the trip, was I didn't see it. But I mean, well, sort of. So like the airport. I mean, we mentioned in the book, we described there's a stuffed polar bear watching over the baggage carousel. So like the first thing you see when you step off the plane is a polar bear. That's real. I saw that. And there was a stuffed polar bear as well in the lobby of the hotel that I was staying in. So I saw quite a few stuffed polar bears, and you kind of got an appreciation for the size of them. But no, we didn't see a real one. We saw, well, a live one. We saw reindeer. We saw lots of whales.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So we did a couple of boat trips to various parts of the island, and I remember saying to my mate who I went with, if we see one whale by the end of the week, I'll be happy. And we saw more than one.
Amazing.
And so yeah, it was a pretty incredible trip, but no bears. I'm just gonna have to go back.
Yeah, what a shame. So how do you approach sort of pacing the clues, reveals, sometimes red herrings as well, and plenty of twists throughout your novels? Because like there's so many that have kept me guessing the whole way through, and I know one in particular had me shocked. I'm not going to name any names, but a Fatal Crossing, definitely. I was like, whoa.
I mean, trial and error, to be honest. So I think you have two different kinds of writers. You have writers who plot everything out before they start writing, and they will spend months working out, okay, in chapter 1 this is going to happen, in chapter 2 this is going to happen, in chapter 3, and then once they start writing, they don't deviate from that plan for love nor money. And then you have writers who are completely the opposite, and they just have an idea for the beginning of a story. Maybe they'll imagine a particular crime scene or a particular terrible way for someone to have been murdered, and they'll just set out writing and see where the story goes, and they'll kind of solve it as they go. Well, I say there are two kinds of writers. I'm sort of somewhere between the two. So I spend a bit of time working out what's going to happen. So I need to know, I think what I absolutely need to know is I need to know who the murderer is, how they've done it, and why they've done it.
Yeah.
And then I spend quite a lot of time getting to know the other characters and working out the relationships between each of them, and working out kind of who loves who hates who knows whose secrets, all that sort of stuff. And then once I've got that, I sort of choose an interesting point to mark the start of the story, and I set out writing, and I try and just find the most interesting and hopefully most organic way of getting from that kind of designated starting line to the finish line, which is, oh my goodness, it's you, and this is how you did it, and this is why. That kind of big reveal chapter. So I'm quite a wasteful writer in that, as I say, there's a lot of trial and error. Like I'll have a go sometimes at 3 or 4 different ways of writing a chapter to try and find the most interesting way of doing it, and throwing away the 3 that don't work and keeping the one that does. And I'll have an idea for a clue, and over the course of writing the draft of a book, I might have that clue pop up in 3 different places. In the story, maybe it'll pop up a quarter of the way through, or halfway through, or 3/4 of the way through, just to try and work out where is the most interesting and the most kind of believable place for this clue to be found. So yeah, it's a lot of trial and error, and sometimes you'll kind of make connections that you didn't know you were going to. So I'll start writing a section of the book thinking I know how it's going to play out, and then as I'm writing it, I'll see an opportunity to do something else, and I'll go, oh, but what if that happened, or they found this here, or they learned this there, or someone overheard this at this point. And I kind of then follow that thread and see where that goes, and sometimes that might mean going back and rewriting something I did a couple of weeks ago. And so there's a lot of it's not a very structured way of writing a book. There's a lot of kind of deleting and rewriting and editing and kind of tinkering with things, but hopefully, I like to think it means that I end up with the most, as I say, the most interesting and the most organic way of getting to that big reveal at the end, which is, just what I always strive to try and do.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, do you ever test your sort of plot twists on friends or family at all?
To be honest, I don't often have time. So I write a book a year, and I need that full year. I'm quite a slow writer, but partly because as I've just described, I spend a lot of time deleting stuff that I've written and then writing it again. So yeah, it does take me the full year to write that book. So by the time I'm done with it, I would love to spend a couple of months, giving it to people and asking them to read it and getting their thoughts on it. But honestly, by the time I'm done, usually it has to just go straight off to my agent and my editor. So they're usually the only ones who actually get to read it before it gets sent to print. But I always ask them, once my editor reads it, I have a list of questions that I want to ask her. So I always ask, did you twig this at this point? And I'll always ask her, the first question I'll always ask is, did she guess the murderer?
Yes.
And if she says yes, I want to know exactly where and how.
Yeah.
So I can go back and maybe tweak it a little bit and try and make it trickier for the next week. So yeah, I suppose the answer is yes. I do ask people and try and sort of stress test my twists on people, but it's quite a small pool of people. It's usually just my agent and my editor.
Yeah. So you've taken readers to obviously the North Pole in an airship, 1920s on a boat, private island in the Lake Garda, and also inside a murder mystery game. Next up, we've got Costa Rican rainforest.
Yeah.
Do you have any other location or historical moment you would love to explore in a future book at all?
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing Egypt at the moment, so I'm about I'm about a quarter of the way into the first draft of a book that's going to be set in Egypt. Yeah, where else? I mean, there are lots of places actually that I'd really like to do. So I went to uni in North Wales. I went to Bangor University, and I've got what I think is a really fun idea for a murder mystery that would be set all around kind of North Wales. So we kind of go to like Anglesey, and it'd take in places like kind of Beaumaris and Conwy Castle and just all these sort of amazing, beautiful places. So that's something I'm really keen to write at some point. As I say, I'm doing Egypt at the moment. Yeah, I do have quite a few places I want to do, lots of things I want to tick off. I mean, I'd quite like to go back to the North Pole. Like, I've got an idea for a ghost story set. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Bit of a horror twinge.
Yeah, I love ghost stories. I really do. I went to Svalbard to research Death in the Arctic, and it was very helpful with that. But I also came back with an idea for a ghost story set up there that I'd really like to write at some point. So yeah, lots of places I'd like to do that I haven't got to just yet.
Nice. So we've got quite a few questions just come in, so I'll dive into those. So Chris asked, crime is a hugely popular genre. Why do you think it fascinates us so much?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think we could spend an entire hour just talking about that, to be honest. Yeah. I think the reason I quite often hear and I quite often give is that I think we have a sort of morbid fascination with crime in the real world, with death and with murder, and just I think we like to look at that sort of stuff and wonder why people do the things they do. And I think crime fiction gives us a lens through, or sort of a means by which to do that and to analyze those sort of awful decisions that people make and try and understand it a little better, but from the safety of our living room with a book. But I think crime I think is an interesting genre because there are so many little subgenres in it. You've got murder mysteries, police procedurals, legal thrillers, serial killer stories. You've got the Jack Reacher types. Just one man and a toothbrush, right across America. Like there is the crime sort of umbrella just covers so much. I think that helps as well. The fact that you can be a crime fan and also be a fan of so many of these different kind of pockets within the genre. And I think we go to each of them for different reasons. I think murder mysteries, which is kind of my thing. I think one of the reasons people go to them, certainly the reason I like going to murder mysteries, is it's kind of, this is going to sound crass, but it's like fun murder. It's like playing a game. You're playing a game with the author, and you're trying to solve the crime yourself before it's kind of solved for you at the end by the detective. Like you're looking at all the clues and you're listening to all the suspects and you're kind of playing detective yourself. And I love that, and that's why I go for murder mysteries. It's why I like writing them. And I'm sure that's it's kind of like, why do we love magic tricks? Because we like to be fooled for a second. We like to be bamboozled. We like to look at, a trick being done and go, how have they done that? And I think a murder mystery is a little bit similar. We like, I know it's explained at the end, but we like to be bamboozled for a little bit and to try and pull it apart and see if we can be clever enough to work it out ourselves. So interesting question. Thank you for that.
Next up, we've got Amy. She asked, "Hi Tom, following on from an earlier question, I was wondering if you've ever got most or all of the way through writing a story and then just completely changed the plot or who the murderer is."
Yeah, I have. So the one that's coming out in January, actually. My Costa Rican one. So that's the only time I've ever changed the murderer. As I say, usually that never changes because it's the one thing I have to know in order to write the story, because it's my finish line at the end that I'm aiming for is that moment of, oh my God, it's you. So I usually, once I know who the murderer is, that's kind of locked in. But with book number 5, which is coming out next year, I had written it. I'd sent the first draft off to my editor, and what happens then is she reads it and she comes back with some feedback, and I make some edits, and we might do that 2 or 3 times before it kind of gets sent off to print. While she was reading it, I was just I was thinking about the book I'd sent her, and I think that the murderer I'd chosen off my characters, it worked, and there was nothing wrong with it. But also I was aware that it wasn't quite right. So I really, really believe in writing on an emotional level. Like, what does the reveal of a certain character as the villain, what does that make you feel? Like, how do I want the reader to feel about this? How are they going to feel about this? Does it strike an emotional chord? It's not enough, I don't think, for a murder mystery to just be technically compelling or to just make sense. When that murderer is revealed, I think you have to feel something. And I just thought, this murderer works, but I'm not feeling enough, for the fact that this character is the murderer. And so I started looking at the other characters and trying to work out, if one of you was the murderer, how would I feel about that? How would that kind of change the emotional sort of dynamic of the story? And for most of them, it was the same. It was like, no, I don't think I'd feel a right lot. I think I'd just say, all right, fair enough. But there was one character in particular who, when I sort of looked at them being the murderer and followed that thread, and I thought, if I could make that work, then I think when that reveal comes, that's going to be a proper gasp moment. Oh my goodness, I cannot believe this person would kill that person. And that's really what you're looking for. And I didn't have it before, but when I then edited the story to make that person the murderer, it just all kind of felt right. So I really, really believe in trying to write from your gut and just trying to look at everything that happens in your story through the lens of, how does my reader feel about this? What kind of emotional chord is it striking, and is it the chord that I want it to be striking? So yeah, I have changed the murderer, but only once, and I hope never to do it again, because it was so,
Yeah. And how do you sort of develop your characters, just going off the back of your answer there? Like, I went to an older Q&A recently, and they said that they actually took them out for coffee.
Wow.
Yeah, which is quite an interesting angle. But obviously you've got quite a lot of characters in each of your story. How do you sort of plot out your characters and the connections they have? Because sometimes that reveals a really interesting one. Do you have like the meme with Charlie Day from Always Sunny with the boards and the string? Is it kind of like that, or?
It's a little bit like that, except with rather than boards, I have notebooks. I just fill notebooks with just lines and lines and lines about who these people are, and taking them out for coffee. I really like that idea. And I definitely I ask myself questions about the characters, like, so I just ask myself loads of questions. So like, where sort of fairly maybe straightforward questions like, how do they meet? Why do they get on? What do they tell each other and not tell each other about themselves? But also things like, what are their favorite films? What's their favorite music? Where do they buy their clothes from? Are they a Costa or a Starbucks person? All this stuff. I guess, rather than kind of having bits of string on a chalkboard, I do sometimes draw diagrams of, let's say, one character has a secret, and I'll kind of put their name in the middle of a sheet of paper, and I'll put all the other characters' names around them, and I'll draw kind of lines from that central name to the names that know the secret. And then has one of the character at 12 o'clock shared a secret of maybe a character at 3 o'clock, I'll draw a line there. And, just kind of trying to visualize that kind of spread of information and try and work out who knows something and how they know it. And that's all. So I do that quite a lot. But no notebooks. I think I heard a writer say a little while ago that like doing that stuff in a notebook rather than just doing it in your head, it's like having a conversation with yourself. Because I think there's really something to be said for writing things down rather than just mulling them over in your head. Because I think when you're writing something down, such as in a notebook, you have to actually order your thoughts to such an extent that you are able to commit it to paper. You have to you have to actually have something to write. It can't just be and I think if you keep it in your head, sometimes the answer remains a little vague and you kind of overlook details that you haven't quite worked out yet. But if you're making yourself write these things down, write down the answers to these questions, such as how do these two people know each other, I find it all kind of comes together a little quickly and a little more confidently. So I spend an awful lot of time doing that with my characters and just trying to get them before I start writing the book, and just trying to get to know them as well as I can. But sometimes things change. You'll be writing the book, and for all of your kind of planning and sort of preparation beforehand, sometimes a character just doesn't quite feel right, and you might end up cutting that character or changing a bit of that character's backstory, or just changing something about them. And it takes a bit of trial and error. But when you kind of work out what it is that isn't quite working about them, when something clicks, then suddenly they start behaving the way you want them to. Sometimes it just takes a bit of trial and error and a bit of getting to know them. I find writing speech for certain characters, I think an exercise I occasionally do is I might have a set of questions that I will ask all of my characters. It'll be the same set of like 10 questions, and trying to work out how they each speak is helpful, because you can then ask, well, why do they speak? Why would sort of each of them answer this question in 6 different ways? Where have they picked up certain words or certain ways of speaking? And so that can be quite helpful. So there are lots of exercises you can do, like taking them for coffee, that are very helpful for making your characters come alive.
Definitely, yeah. And Paz asked, which other author or authors would you say inspired your writing?
Loads. I think one of the biggest sources of inspiration is Anthony Horowitz. So we've touched on him already, because I was reading Magpie Murders when I decided I wanted to have a proper go at writing A Fatal Crossing. But at the same time, he is one of the only authors that I think I've read pretty much all of my kind of reading life. So, because of course, we said already, I was a child of the 90s. So that meant not only Harry Potter, but Alex Rider. Yeah. Exactly. The very first book I bought in my own money was an Alex Rider book. I can remember I borrowed the first one from the school library and loved it so much that I think I was of an age where I just started getting pocket money, and I remember it was a Sunday afternoon, and I bought the second Alex Rider book from a little independent bookshop in Leeds, and near where we lived, so I all through my kind of growing up, my teens, I read the Alex Rider books, and then just as I got into my 20s, he started writing quote unquote grown-up books, like so he started doing Sherlock Holmes and James Bond, and then Magpie Murders. So he's been a huge source of inspiration. I guess I think Conan Doyle probably is. I was always slightly more of a Sherlock Holmes kid than a Poirot kid. So, and to this day, Hound of the Baskervilles is still one of my favorite stories in the world. Probably my favorite detective story. So many authors. But those are the two kind of the big ones that come to mind.
Okay. Chris has got another question as well. Do you have dream castings in mind of any of your books or adapted for the screen?
Yeah, I do. So a little exercise I'll do as part of the character creation process is I'll try and put faces to them, and those faces can come from anywhere. Like they can be actors, they can be just sort of celebrity kind of personalities, like kind of talk show hosts and things. They could be singers, politicians. Very occasionally, I use the faces of people I know, but very, very occasionally. And I'll try a few different faces until I kind of get the right one. Because sometimes, again, something will feel like almost right, but not quite. And then, 2 or 3 faces later, you'll get the right face, and you'll be like, yeah, that's what this character looks like. But actors, I use a lot of actors for that. So in Murder on Lake Garda, the bride at the wedding, I think, would be, in my head, would be played by Anna de Armas.
Yeah.
Yeah. The groom, I was sort of picturing Sam Claflin, like in his Hunger Games era. That's
Yeah. Nice.
Who else have we got? The groom's kind of godfather, guy called Jeremy Lambourne. He, in my head, is Charles Dance. So yeah, so I quite often I do have characters who who I give the faces of actors. So in the dream scenario, yeah, I'd love to see those actors, but I reach very high, as you can tell. Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, nice. So you've got obviously quite a variety of audiobook narrators as well. So like Vinette Robinson for Death in the Arctic from Boiling Point, which is great fun. How involved do you get with sort of the audiobook process?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting process. That, I mean, so the way it tends to work is my publisher sends me a shortlist of voice actors who they think would sort of be particularly suitable, and then they ask sort of for if I have any strong opinion for kind of one candidate over the others, and that's great. And they send you so audio sort of voice actors rather, they kind of have like an audio CV that you can go through and you can listen to. So each actor will have, you might get like a minute or two of an audio book that they've done before, and there might be like a radio advert that they've done, and you get a series of things like that with each actor that you get to listen to and hear their kind of voice and their range and what they sound like. And I always kind of really enjoy going through those and then saying, I think I could see this one bringing this to it, but also I think this one's voice just kind of really fits the location, and so yeah, that's always a fun process.
Definitely. And I mean, with the proofs out in the world, I saw, what can you tell us about your upcoming book, A Killer in Paradise? Did you get to go to the rainforest this time?
Yeah. Well, I did. It wasn't meant to be a research trip. It was we were on honeymoon in Costa Rica, and then we were staying in this kind of really cool lodge in the rainforest, and it was very glamorous and very remote, and which are kind of two perfect things that I look for in a location for a murder mystery. And I think sort of by the end of our time there, I came back thinking, I think I could make a murder mystery work in a place like that. And I'd not done a rainforest before, so I mean, that just felt very fitting to go European castle, North Pole, rainforest. I thought, those are sort of quite very distinct locations. But the book itself, so it's about a group of friends who were all at uni together. Group of 6 friends, 5 Brits and 1 American who was there as an exchange student at the University of York. And at the end of their time studying, they all spent the summer backpacking around Central America, spent 2 months backpacking around Central America, and then the 5 Brits went back home and the American went back to the States. And she is the heir to a large hotel company in the US. So kind of imagine like Hilton, that's the sort of thing we're thinking about. And she goes back to the States to start working for the company and start working her way up inside the company. 10 years go by, and she is unveiling her first project for the company, which is this eco lodge in the rainforest. And she is inviting her friends from the UK, her old friends from uni, to come to the opening party of it. She says, let's have a reunion. We all went round Costa Rica together when we were 21. Let's all get back together, and you guys can come to the opening party and we'll have a great time. It'll be lovely to see everyone. So this group comes back together, but something, fairly terrible happened on that backpacking trip around Costa Rica 10 years earlier. And so not everyone is coming to this party with great intentions. In fact, everyone's got some kind of ulterior motive for being there. So and not everyone is gonna make it out alive. But yeah, so that's yes, that's A Killer in Paradise coming out next year, which was a lot of fun to write, and yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing what people make of it.
Definitely. And I love like the vintage art style of your book covers. They're just so amazing. Do you have the same artist that does these, and how involved do you get in that as well? That side of things.
Yeah, I do. He's a very talented guy called Patrick who lives in Brighton, and he's designed all of the covers. Yeah, and it's all his work. I can't I can take absolutely no credit for the covers. I've been really very lucky with them. So I mean, the way covers work in the book world is it's kind of totally up to your publisher. So it's
Okay.
in so it's in my contracts that when I sign a publishing contracts that the publisher kind of gets to do whatever cover they want to do, essentially. And they do, when the cover is ready, when the art is ready, they do send it your way, and they say, here's the cover, we hope you really like it. And I think if you were to really really have a problem with it, they would, and you have a good relationship with your publisher, I think they would take your concerns into account, and I'm sure you'd be able to have a conversation about it and try and do something. But no, I've been very lucky. I've got, as you say, these amazing covers that have been designed for me, and I've never had a problem with them. So yeah, I always look forward to the new cover coming through because I know I'm going to love it. Because Patrick does great work, and yeah, so that's how the cover process works.
So you looked out there.
Yeah, I really did. I really really did. Yeah.
So Amy's got another audio question. When you're writing, do you ever imagine how a scene might sound in audiobook, especially with the dramatic reveals?
Not particularly. Maybe I should think about that a little bit more. No, I have to admit, I think I just get, particularly in the most dramatic bits, I just get kind of so lost in the writing of it. I'm not really, I guess I'm not really stopping to think, how's this going to sound on an audio. I think maybe later on in the process, I think a little bit about that. So when you're kind of getting to the very end of the editing process, you go from looking at kind of plot holes and story beats that maybe aren't working as well as they could, to looking at specific things like, have I used this word too many times, or is this sentence a bit wordy, or whatever. So maybe that would be the point when I think about how something's going to sound on the audiobook. And sometimes quite often actually during that bit of the process, I actually read the book aloud to myself as I'm going through it, and just sort of see how it's sounding and how it's flowing. And yeah, so that's probably the bit when I think most about how something's going to sound. But no, during the actual writing process, I'm probably not thinking about that as much as I should. So maybe that's a good reminder to think about that some more.
Yeah. So obviously with your fifth whodunnit out next January, you mentioned you love to do a ghost story in the Arctic, which I'm worried about what happened in the Arctic now. You didn't
no.
see anything.
No, nothing terrible. But
No.
yeah.
Yeah. Are there any other sort of genres you like to explore in future novels?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I have an idea for a slightly different kind of crime. I mean, we were talking earlier about the number of different kind of subgenres that come under the crime umbrella. So I think, I have an idea, potentially a series starter for something that a slightly different kind of crime novel. I'd love to do a bit of sci-fi. So, I grew up loving sci-fi, like Star Wars and Doctor Who and all that sort of stuff. So, and I still like that stuff. So I'd love to have a go at something like that. I have a couple of ideas for kind of slightly more serious dramas that maybe one day I'll have a go at. So yeah, lots of stuff. So I've always read quite widely growing up. It's never been a case of I just read kind of whodunits and that's it. I've always read a bit of everything. I mean, like, my love of ghost stories comes from I read The Woman in Black every year, every Christmas. So yeah, I think lots of other things I'd like to do, given the opportunity.
I know you mentioned it earlier, but I thought you were generally going to say Scooby-Doo then.
Scooby-Doo. I mean, do you know what? If the opportunity ever came to write an episode of Scooby-Doo, I would not turn that down. No way.
That would be amazing. Dream book there.
Yeah, exactly.
So as we're an audiobook charity, we'd love to know if you've got any sort of go-to audiobooks you really like, any preference for length or narration style, because obviously there's quite a lot of immersive dramatizations at the moment, or do you prefer sort of single voice narrators?
Yeah, I think well, just tackling that question specifically, I think it depends on the book. I think with a book that has a huge number of characters, then yeah, I think I really like. So, like, whodunnit is perfect for it. When you've
Yeah.
got 12 people trapped in a house or in a train or something, then that's kind of the perfect vehicle, I think, for a multi-voice kind of audiobook. So yeah, I think whatever kind of the book itself requires, I don't think I have a strong opinion either way. I think I like both, and I think when they're done well, I think both can be amazing. As for audiobooks, I particularly love. I mean, I'm sorry to go on so much about ghost stories, but I think ghost stories are just so good. I mean, I'd say The Woman in Black. I say I read The Woman in Black every year. I actually listen to The Woman in Black every year, if we're completely honest. So there is an amazing on Audible. There's an amazing version of The Woman in Black, and I'm feel really bad now because I can't remember the guy's name who reads it, but it's only 4 hours long because it's a short book, but he just does the most incredible job, and because it's so short, I listen to that every year in December because the opening chapter of The Woman in Black, for those who haven't read it, is set on Christmas Eve, so I tell myself it's a Christmas story, so I'm gonna listen to it every Christmas. And then I've just listened to a couple of amazing ghost stories by Michelle Paver, who I think did that. They called the Wolf Brother, kind of the teen novels. But she's done a couple of adult ghost stories. One's called Thin Air and one's called Dark Matter, and I listened to those quite recently. So I don't know what it is about scary stuff that works so well as an audio. I think I don't know, is it that sense of maybe like being by a campfire and someone telling a spooky story to you? I'm not sure, but yeah, I listen. Yeah, thinking about it, I listened to a surprising amount of scary stuff.
Did you watch Are You Afraid of the Dark when you were younger? Is that what it was, maybe?
No, I don't think it is.
No.
You know what? I think I think. I mean, my love of Scooby Doo probably helps because it's all about monsters and stuff, and my love of sci-fi, and so I've always kind of been interested in monsters. But yeah, I think one of my sort of most formative experiences growing up is I went to see The Woman in Black stage play when I was 10.
10?
Yeah. So I remember we were. So I'm from Leeds, and we were in London for a couple of nights, and I think my folks really wanted to go see The Woman in Black, and just sort of thought me and my brother would be all right with it, and so off we went. And I was kind of borderline traumatized, and I think that might be where my fascination with ghost stories really started to kind of build momentum. So. But yeah, no, I do love a scary kind of audiobook. It just works incredibly well, I think.
Yeah, and they're just so immersive as well, aren't they?
Yeah, I think that's it. When you get someone an actor who can really capture the atmosphere and the tone, and I think it just it takes an already great book and it just elevates it, I think. So yeah.
Definitely. And what would you say your sort of favourite murder mystery or whodunit is? Like book, film, TV show?
Scooby-Doo. I mean, like, my favorite book is Hound of the Baskervilles. It just, again, ghost stories. It's a murder mystery wrapped up in a ghost story about a hellhound in Dartmoor, and it's so good. And I love that it is at once it is a great ghost story all the way through, but at the end, it does end up being a proper murder mystery. There is no, I guess we'll never know if the hound was real or not. You find out exactly what's going on. And I love that about it. And it's Sherlock Holmes, and I love Sherlock Holmes. And yeah, so I really enjoy that. Film-wise, I think the Knives Out movies
they're so good. Yeah.
I think Benoit Blanc might be the best on-screen detective that we've got at the moment. I just think he's so. I could watch 100 of those films.
What was this quote about donuts? It just got me every time I watched it. It was so funny.
Like the donut-shaped hole inside the donut-shaped hole.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that so I follow quite a lot of like writing things on Instagram and various, and like there's that bit I think quite near the beginning of the first Knives Out movie where he's going, it makes no damn sense, but it compels me. And like that pops up on my Instagram feed about once a week from some writing channel saying like, when you have an idea for a new story but no plot or anything yet, and I'm like, it's so true. So yeah, I love that you can feel Daniel Craig just having the time of his life with that character. Like, I mean, I loved his Bond, but you could kind of tell by the end he'd had enough.
He was sort of done, wasn't he? Yeah.
He was a little bit. And he was still great, don't get me wrong, but I think you could tell he was ready to kind of call it a day. Whereas with Benoit Blanc, you can just feel him having such a good time, and like that that comes out, and then you have a good time with him. And so yeah, I mean there's a lot of wonderful stuff being done. With tea, I tell you what, this is not a new one, but so I my wife and I had a baby last summer, and while I was up sort of late with the baby, I rewatched all of Sherlock from and I'd forgotten just how much I loved that show. Like again, I think Cumberbatch is just so perfect. Like that episode in the second series, that scandal in Belgravia, the episode. I mean that I just think that's one of the best hour and a half of TV I've ever seen. I just thought it was brilliant. The twist at the end, I am Sherlocked. I just thought it blew my mind at the time, and it still does now. Irene Adler, that's it. So the villain is Irene Adler in that one. So yeah, I think we've had a lot of really, really good TV and on-screen detectives recently, but Benoit Blanc is my favourite for now.
Yeah. Have you done the Sherlock escape room in London yet? That is so good.
I haven't, but I feel like that would be right up my street.
Definitely would recommend.
I'll have to look it up.
Definitely. So are you reading anything currently at the moment?
That is one of those questions that, like, the moment you are asked, it goes,
mine goes blank.
Like, I am listening at the moment, actually, to the Da Vinci Code. Which very random, but as I say, I like my current kind of work in progress is in Egypt, and it's very kind of Indiana Jones inspired. So like looking for like ancient tombs and clues and things like that. And I've been meaning to. I've seen the Da Vinci Code movie, and I think I tried reading it when it came out, but I was a kid and it was just too dense for me. So I thought, do you know what? Let's read the Da Vinci Code. It feels like a sort of good point of reference for what I'm trying to write at the moment. So yeah, I'm listening to that. I mean, I'm listening to an awful lot at the moment, just because with the baby around, I don't get quite as much time as I used to actually sit down with a book. So most of my books actually I'm consuming in sort of audio format at the moment. So yeah, listening to the Da Vinci Code right now, and I'm about 2/3 of the way through it, and really enjoying it.
Nice, yeah. And I'm glad you did say Indiana Jones, because with obviously the airship with your last book, I was like, nice. So have you what would you say your favorite part of the writing process is? Is it sort of the research, because obviously you've been to so many interesting places, or sort of more the plotting, or hearing the finished audiobook?
I think it's about, for me, it's when you start properly writing. So I've done my research. I've done all of my kind of working out who my characters are, and I've done the tricky part of trying to work out how the murder actually happened. And I'm just setting off to try and actually get this thing written. Because at that point, it kind of feels like the opportunities are endless, and as you kind of get towards the end of that first draft, it suddenly feels more and more like, you have fewer opportunities to kind of go off and try things, and suddenly deadlines get more pressing, and but when you're in that first kind of stage of just writing it, and you've got 6 months to get this draft written, which feels like all the time in the world, and you kind of feel like a little kid again, writing stories just for fun. So yeah, I really think that is probably my favorite part of the process. But I mean, it's all wonderful, like, as you say, hearing the audiobook, I mean, that's always a surreal moment, hearing an actual actor, bringing to life something that you have written, that always feels pretty special. Going out, so I'm doing a lot of publicity at the moment for Death in the Arctic, so that's just come out in paperback. So I've done 3 or 4 publicity events for that, like bookshop talks over the last week or so, and that's always amazing. Having I had someone come up to me the other day with like copies of all 4 books in hardback, and just being like, I love your books. And so moments like that are really, really special. So yeah, I try to look for things to kind of enjoy and be grateful for, I guess, throughout the whole process. But I mean, my favorite bit, if I have a favorite, is probably that first kind of getting started on a new idea, when, as I say, you just feel like a kid again, writing stories for fun. It's great. Yeah.
Amazing. So have you ever found anything? What was the most unexpected thing you learned while researching for one of your books?
Oh, blimey, it's probably got to be something to do with Death in the Arctic. I learned so much crazy stuff about it. I mean, it's probably the wildest thing I learned was to do with airships in the 1920s, and I mean, there's a lot of crazy stuff about 1920s airships. So I read that one airship, excuse me, had a grand piano that had been built out of aluminium to make it lightweight, so it didn't weigh the airship down. There were plans for airships to dock at the top of the Empire State Building, and people kind of ride the lift down into New York, and that was how people were. Never actually happened. They attempted it once, and it was so difficult that they were like, no, this isn't at all practical. And yeah, some of those airships had smoking rooms, I learned.
Not terrifying at all.
Not at all. With special airlocks to separate them from the ship. So yeah, lots of crazy stuff there.
Definitely. And do you have any sort of writing rituals at all? Have you put together certain playlists for characters maybe at all?
Playlists sometimes I do use. So sometimes I will come up with playlists for a book, just to kind of, I don't know, evoke the tone or the feeling of a location or something. Like so with Death and A Killer in Paradise, I spent a bit of time coming up with the playlist, a couple of playlists, one that would play at the party, the opening party, at the lodge, just to try and get me kind of into the event. And I came up with playlists of tunes that these friends would listen to back when they were in uni 10 years ago. Like what were the biggest hits during those 3 years? What would they have listened to when they were on nights out? And so what would they probably be listening to during this reunion? So yeah, sometimes I do use playlists. Yeah.
Nice. And Chris asked, if you were to make a Cluedo expansion, what unique weapons, room, or character would you add?
Sorry for the meeting as well, folks. My 1-year-old has just started nursery, so everyone in this house is very ill. So excuse me. That is one of the most interesting questions I've ever asked. What would I bring in? Is there poison in Cluedo? I don't think there is poison, is there?
I don't think so.
There's the lead pipe, there's the rope, there's the gun, there's the dagger. I don't think there's poison in Cluedo. I could be wrong about that. Someone in the comments tell me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm right about it. Yeah, let's bring poison in as a weapon, because that feels like it's missing. As for rooms, I don't know what rooms. It's in a big country house, isn't it? What rooms?
Yeah, all I know is the billiard room. That one sticks in my head all the time. Maybe a library. That would probably be a good one.
There's got to be a library, hasn't there?
Yeah.
Is there a pantry? Is there a tennis court? There's a kitchen. Yeah, I mean, that's the sort of question that I wish I'd had an hour to think about before coming on to. So, yeah. Let me think a bit more about room while we're answering these last few questions. I'll probably think of anything. Yeah, thank you for that. That's a great question.
Yeah. So while you're thinking about that, you obviously mentioned you're on a sort of promotional tour at the moment. Where can readers and watchers find you next?
So next week I'm off up to the Midlands. So I'm in Worcester on I think Tuesday night, and I'm in Birmingham on Wednesday night. So I've got a couple of nights there. So that'll be a lot of fun. And then in October I'm heading up north. So I'm doing a bookshop talk in Leeds and another in Manchester. Can't remember the exact dates of those, but they're all on my Instagram. So that's a reminder to say follow me on Instagram for for more kind of information about tour dates and new books. And yeah, Instagram is kind of the social media place to find me. So, yeah.
Nice. Good. And as you've been speaking about audiobooks, have you ever considered maybe narrating a short story or bonus content yourself? I know you said you throw out quite a lot of chapters, so have you ever maybe do like short stories of those chapters maybe?
Yeah, I occasionally. So I really enjoyed like drama as a kid. I did drama at GCSE level, and I was always kind of quite heavily involved whenever like a school play came around. And as I say, I tried to write a Fatal Crossing as a play that me and some friends would put on. So the idea was very much that I would be in that play. So yeah, occasionally. Usually when I'm at that point at the end of the editing process and I'm kind of reading the book aloud to myself to see how it's flowing, I'll sort of have a moment where I think, yeah, I could have a go at the audio for this. That would be that would be sort of a fun thing to do. So I mean, like I would probably, I think I would actually really like at some point to try doing some audio. Whether or not I would actually be any good, it's probably whether they would want me. I think would be the barrier there. But yeah, no, I would be lying if I said it hadn't crossed my mind that it might be fun for me to do the audio for one of my books.
And then just throwing it back, so obviously the murder game, we had a murder mystery evening. Yeah. Was that based on, did you go to one and it was just terrible? Or?
No, so I was living in Reading at the time, and there was this amazing company in Reading that would do these interactive murder mystery kind of afternoons, where you would kind of get together a team of a few mates and you would meet up in the middle of this park in Reading called Forbury Gardens, and there was a guy there who was dressed as like an old school detective. He had like a trilby and like the raincoat and everything, and he would explain the story to you, and he would say, right, this person has been murdered, and we know it's one of these three suspects, and there are clues all over Reading for you to go and try and find, and they would be like in shops, and they would be in like local monuments and stuff like that, and you would have to go and try. You'd have 3 hours, if I remember rightly, to go and try and find as many of these things as you could, and you'd have to like follow trails and solve riddles and stuff like that. And like they put some effort into this, they really did. Like I remember there was one, I did about 4 or 5 of these, and it was a different game every time, different story every time. And there was one that was in Reading Station, and I don't know how they got this to happen, but they got one of the phones to ring, like the pay phones in the train station, and you would answer the phone and you'd get a bit of information down the phone. And and there were actors as well, like if you could find them in like bars and restaurants and cafes around town, and if you could find them and ask them the right question, they'd give you a bit of information. And I remember doing one of those and just thinking, if someone was murdered during this thing, like that would be, what if someone was murdered during this thing? Not what if the game we were playing was real, but what if one of the people playing this game was murdered midway through? That just seemed like a really fun way to kick off a murder mystery. I liked the kind of the meta murder within a murder kind of element to that. But the problem was where to set it. And somehow the middle of Reading just didn't quite seem like, I loved living in Reading. I had a really good time living there, but it just didn't quite seem atmospheric enough. It didn't seem the right follow-up to a 1920s cruise liner. And so I thought, right, let's do a country house. We'll do a murder mystery party with all the clues and the actors and stuff. And we'll set it somewhere kind of quite remote and quite atmospheric. And I spent my summer holidays in Exmoor growing up. Every year we'd go and spend a week on a farm in Somerset, and I thought, great, I'll set it down there. Like, it's a part of the country that I know quite well. It's very remote, it's very beautiful, very atmospheric, and that's where that came from. So no, it came from a great murder mystery game rather than a terrible one.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, and probably got time for just one more. So just to close this all off, what do you find most rewarding and most challenging about writing murder mysteries?
It's probably the same thing for both of those two halves of that question, actually, and that is writing the big reveal chapter at the end. Like, that is what we read murder mysteries for. It's for that moment at the end where the curtain is lifted and you're told who the murderer is and how it was all done, and you go, how did I miss that? And that is, that's satisfying to read. It's so satisfying to write. And but God, it's difficult making everything line up as you want it to, and making sure the clues are there, but they're not too obvious, and hiding bits of information in a way that the reader will pick it up without realizing they've picked it up. So it's really, really difficult. But then when you do, through a lot of trial and error, make it work, it's so satisfying. And then meeting readers who enjoy the book and say to you, I didn't see that coming. Not, you completely caught me out. That's, and it's by far the most challenging, but also the most enjoyable bit of writing a murder mystery, I would say.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you so much for spending your time with us, Tom Hindle.
Thanks for having me.
Right, thank you. Thanks to everybody for your questions as well, and I hope to see you in the next one.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.